Yes, so excuse me if I'm breathless because I've had an ulcerative colitis moment again. It's just the second time today. Anyway, I'm about to talk about an interesting topic, and I think it's interesting, obviously. But the main thing that got me thinking about it was listening to a video by Jamie Dodder, who he's responding to, I think, a lesbian thing. Something about lesbians. There's like gatekeeping on lesbians and stuff. And he mentioned briefly about how I was trying to remember is yeah, like how people try to be better than others and try to come across that way anyway. But how it can be sort of damaging and just how bad it can be, I think, as well. I think he said. Um, and he mentioned about treating people with kindness and respect, which is something I definitely believe in myself. It's definitely important to do that, especially nowadays where things can just be used against you for any reason whatsoever, malicious or not. So, yeah, another gameplay is not doing anything here. I see those trails and I don't know why. Anyway, so the topic I sort of have is about veganism and LGBTQ+, which this got me thinking about, because I realise there's some sort of ties to it, in a sense. Because in the vegan movement, we promote animal rights, and that is our primary goal, even though environmentalism is pretty important as well. But one problem we do see is that a lot of often other minorities don't seem to apply to it as much. And while there are certainly probably a lot more LGBTQ plus and disabled, even ethnic people in the vegan movement, there are definitely a vast majority of these people who are not vegan. And as we try to do in the movement anyway, we try to promote veganism as not only being ethically, not sure the term, basically just it's a completely ethical thing to do. That's all it is. It doesn't mean you're better than everyone else, it just means you've come to the realisation, you've seen the facts, and you've understood them. That's why most people, like myself included, are vegan. And it's really important. Like the reason I became vegan was because I realised the things I believed before about animal products were wrong. You know, essentially them already being there, meaning it's already happened and it doesn't matter. It is false. And the refutation for that is basically they're only there because of supply and demand. If you didn't buy them, they wouldn't be there. And it's as simple as that. And then I've also experienced like suffering myself with eating too much animal products, which would then have reminded me of the things I know about the dairy industry, which are quite horrific. But you might be wondering where LGBTQ plus comes into play here. It's quite simple. It applies to many minorities, but veganism, in a sense, is a rebellion against the systematic oppression of everyone. Basically, every minority and everyone who's ever going to be sort of marginalised in that sense. And there are some close ties between that and animal agriculture, of all things. Feminists, for example, should always be vegan because in animal agriculture, the female bodies of animals are exploited. And oddly enough, in the same sort of vein, they don't have access to their bodily autonomy, let alone can consent to it. Like many males are like castrated without anesthetic, and it's fucking horrific. And it's often done as children as well, like when they're babies. It's fucking gruesome. And like most people now, even though we have access to our bodily autonomy, there are people who want to take that away. Which is no different to what's happening in animal agriculture. If you want an example of what that looks like, look no further. And there will be people who fucking probably will castrate you if they find out you're of a certain minority. Like they'll do horrific things to put you in a place where you're vulnerable. Which again is happening in animal agriculture. So again, there's plenty of links. And that's why it's so important to point this out. And I say this as someone who's been quite closely thinking about ethics for years. But I encourage people to look at debates on it because I think the only way you're going to find out if you're right or wrong about something is if someone's debated the topic and responded to the things you're saying. You know, I see people saying dumb things like, where do you get your protein? Which by this point has been refuted so many times that it's just more like a joke. It's not an actual question. And anyone with Google can find that out. It's so fucking obvious. But there's like ethics-based questions, which are like do animals want to be killed? People think like, yeah, that's why they're here. They're here to be killed and eaten. But the reality is that isn't the case, and you can't know because animals can't communicate. They can communicate through expression and obviously their voice. And they can speak. You know, like a dog will sort of screech and then whimper when they're hurt. Actually, I've heard that a lot because we had dogs in my life. But yeah, that's the way that animals express pain and obviously discontent. So the logic from there means that oppressing animals is never good. Like doing harm to them, never good. And I sort of try to remember to talk about this after. They don't have the right to their bodily autonomy. So feminists, trans, or even just a different sexuality of doing it all together, animals don't have that right. And that's because people see them as less than human, essentially. And that's what happens when a minority is oppressed. And that's what's happening to animals who are just as vulnerable as us. Even all minorities, it's quite harrowing. That's why it's important I bring this up. But then the other thing is that people might say something all along the lines of, well, it's just the abuse that's wrong, right? Well, they don't say right, unfortunately. They don't seem to want to doubt themselves. And this is the problem with when people debate topics. When you are having doubt, you're essentially promoting an echo chamber, or like a tunnel vision, or like a single way of thinking, basically. And when you start to think there's no doubt, then that means you're closed-minded in a sense. Not in an assaulting way, but towards a topic, rather. And that's a dangerous way of thinking. Over the years, that's proved more and more true the more I've debated topics and thought about them. So it's important to be wary of that. Obviously, don't ignore it. But the other thing, well, it was addressing it, that was the other thing. But on a fundamental level, all abuse happens and all vulnerabilities exist because of one thing: exploitation. It's when you see someone as exploitable that they become vulnerable and end up becoming victims in many cases. And this is true for humans as well. And, with like the far right and how they respond to minorities, for example, they see an exploit. They see a reason to exploit people, and that's for their own gain often. And their own gain in this case could be whether they want to feel powerful, they want to feel strong, even though that's not how you feel strong, or they just outright want something to be outraged by. And so that brings along many issues with it, obviously. And that's why it's important to discuss this. Why it's important to even bring this to the attention of people. Like, it's definitely something that shouldn't be ignored. Like, fuck's sake, people. And we're in a climate crisis at the moment where the planet is warming up and also going to suffer more because of this. There are people who are going to suffer more, minorities especially, even people in like poverty will probably get worse. Because like I've got proper aircon, I'm not afraid to admit that. I use it because it gets too warm when I'm struggling in the heat. And it's a struggle when I don't have access to it, essentially. But there are people out there who do not have the luxuries that we have, and I think to care for them, we need to be more mindful of everything else around us. A lot of time, throwing money at a charity can only do so much. At a fundamental level, it requires direct action and essentially dismantling capitalism and stuff. There's many different reasons. It's so important that we do that because how are we going to find peace? How are we going to have that in our lifetimes? And the only problem is it's a gradual process. And I think to throw on like the honest side of things, because I'm an honest person, I try to be as best as I can, admit where I'm wrong, whenever I am wrong. Like the thing with living a vegan lifestyle for over 5 years now, I've learned so much about ethics and obviously kindness and compassion. But the other thing is, as much as there's its upsides, it comes with drawbacks. When you first start, it can be difficult to find what is and isn't vegan. Because you're often like reading through ingredients of things that are marked, and sometimes they are vegan, but sometimes they aren't. It often comes down to asking the manufacturer, which sucks. Because it can take ages to figure out that, or even find anyone that's referenced it. We haven't done it themselves. So that's always a struggle. Sometimes you accidentally eat something that's not vegan, like at a restaurant. I've had that before. Definitely didn't know it at the time, but because of anxiety, I just didn't bother to bring it up. It's too much. There's different issues with it. But health is not something I've struggled with. Blood tests have always come back fine, except for iron, which they seem to have stopped bothering with for some reason at the GP. But definitely keep on track of iron. I think that's another thing. The only multivitamins you need, for example, like B12 and omega-3. If you don't have like chia seeds or anything, sometimes you can't digest chia seeds. I don't know why I can't. There's like many different sources out there, and it's easier to live this lifestyle. Over time, it gets easier as well. And strangely enough, you start caring more about health the longer you're on it. And weirdly enough, I'm overweight. I'm actually 140 kilograms as of my last weighing. And I started at like 110, I think, when I first started being vegan, so I was already quite large. But now I'm overweight and I don't even overeat that much. I have decent portion sized meals. Sometimes a plateful, but not all the time. And I do eat healthily as well, which is a bizarre thing. And to even throw an even bigger twist on that, I've developed ulcerative colitis, I think, as a result of stress and anxiety. And oddly enough, even though I used to shit my guts up and lost a lot of weight, since going on a medication that's treating it, I've actually put on weight and stopped losing it, which is weird. I'm also on metazapine for depression, which I've had since like 10 years ago. Yeah, like, I think the suffering of your own life is not nearly as bad as an animal's. And that's how I try to think of it. It could always be far worse, and also the chances of you being here is very low because that means you've overcome like so many odds in not only life but the universe. The fact that we live on a planet that's in a solar system is such a small chance. The fact that life developed in these critical conditions is such a low chance. The fact we survived, supposedly anyway, survived a meteor impact that wiped out dinosaurs and probably many other species as well. Again, very low chance. And the fact we're in a society with all this technology where I can even talk about this. Again, like, we get into a chance so low that it sort of outweighs the number of stars in the universe, I think. I did sort of get that statistic from Thomas Gillen? Can't remember his last name, sorry. It's an interesting short, I recommend it. Yeah, like the chances are so low, and I think that's sort of a reason to be grateful if you can. And also use this opportunity to do some good for the world. And you start doing that by promoting a vegan lifestyle, promoting compassion towards not only animals but people as well, even those you might necessarily disagree with. It's important to be neutral and not to take things too seriously in that sense either. And I think when you can make things your livelihood, it can be quite detrimental to your health. I notice this with vegan activists and even my own experience. But if you fully commit yourself to it, it can end up being miserable because people don't listen. And I think that can also harm a message as well. So it should be kept as like a side thing. Yeah, I think that's all I've got to talk about there. Hopefully you learned something. I don't know if you think LGBTQ plus people have the capacity to be vegan. It's not impossible to do either, especially nowadays. You've got all the information you can get. And obviously, think about what you're saying, and like, if you disagree, share that opinion. I try to even still man like other arguments, but I generally can't, and I can't even refute the premise of veganism, which, for anyone unaware, is avoiding animal exploitation and cruelty wherever possible. In your lifestyle, that is. Also, if you do it directly, it's the same thing, but hopefully people are not doing that directly. Yeah. So thanks for listening, and see everyone another time.